Welcome everyone. So let's start. This is 7:30. So this is Tushar Deshmukh, and I'm welcoming you all for this UX Talks season 3. Uh, we have very great speaker today, and before we jump to our core topic, I know everybody is now waiting for that topic, but just quickly, give me 5 minutes so that I will just introduction and everything we will do. So yes, this is UX Talk. Now we are at season 3. UX Talk, I started during COVID times, and it was like in pandemic, everyone was sitting at home, and we are nothing to do. That time we started this activity. Uh, Idea behind UX Talk is to spread UX knowledge, and let's make awareness about design discipline itself, UX, different branches. So we started this UX talk. So currently we are at season 3. We have very great speaker. You can check our Twitter page, LinkedIn, YouTube, and almost all major podcasts have UXTalks. Is a channel. Please, you can subscribe, and you can see what subjects were covered in the past, and hopefully you will get some knowledge and awareness about this UX field or design field. So recently now we have done very good partnership with ADPList. So Felix and we are close very long back, and we started this as a group partnership. That again we have a same interest to spread knowledge and everything. Uh, so group sessions, and everyone, ADPList is I think world's one of the biggest mentor platform. Almost recently I have checked, I think 7,000 plus we have mentors there. So yes, I'm also mentor there. So if you want, you can connect me on ADPList for any guidance or anything. So ADPList is doing very interesting things and new collaborations, and so let's kudos for ADPList, and hopefully we can have a very interesting activity in futures. Uh, and UX talk. So now we are doing some group sessions together with ADP. So stay tuned, follow ADPList, UX talks. So interesting topics and speakers are lined up. Uh, you can give suggestions, which topic, which subject you are interested. So I will try to take those topics so that we can have a discussions. So UX talk is not only will stop here. So if I have any questions, please connect us on LinkedIn, and you can have a discussion on design, everything. Okay. So again, welcome everyone for today's talk, and we have a very interesting speaker with us, Lennie, and welcome Lennie for today's talk. And I hope today's talk will be as interesting as topic is very unique, and I personally thanks you agree to come on this particular session. And so again, I'm welcome everyone. Simple, we'll follow protocol. If you want to ask any question, definitely you can turn on your video and you can ask question. Or we have a Zoom chat. Please start putting question there. So definitely, Lenny and we try to take definitely some questions. Let's make things very interesting. So Lenny is a product designer. So give me just time for introduce her formally. So Lennie Liu is from Canada, and she is a design thinker, design leader, very passionate about design. Uh, and she's now also mentoring on ADPList. So you can book session with her also on ADPList for. Uh, yes, she is now working with very good clients and companies in this respect field. So without wasting time, I will hand over to Lennie. Uh, Before we go our topic, no? as I always said, uh, everyone's journey is very beautiful and we have very inspiration from. So before we start on our core topic, so I would like to ask, just brief us about your journey, how you start design and what makes you to become a designer and what is as a mentor now, what you are doing. Okay. And then definitely all stages yours and you can start with. And definitely we'll have some question answer there.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you, Tushar. First of all, thank you everyone for joining us today. I know it's a Sunday, regardless which time zone you're at, but thank you for joining a UX talk on Sunday. And as Tushar mentioned, let me just share my deck at the same time, and I guess at the same time, I'll just introduce myself a little bit. So, okay. About me. Yes. So I've been a designer for my whole professional life. I've actually started as a graphic designer, as a lot of designers. My first job was working in broadcasting and designing the background screen, lower thirds, title, all those stuff, and especially the charts, like the graphs you see in the news program. And I think after a while, I just gradually realized that it's not my calling, because when people are watching news, they care about what's going on, what's the latest. They don't really care about today's chart or graph, it's green or red, how it impacts their experience. So that's sort of where I realized I want to actually bake the cake rather than just be the cherry on top of the cake. So I did my master in digital media, and where I've been introduced to the digital realm and become a UI UX designer, as a lot of people. Then my journey started. I've worked with basically both 2B and 2C field. And the majority of my experience, I've worked with enterprise companies. So Canada Life, which is an insurance company, Rogers Communications, Telecom, and currently Staples, which is a retail trying to be an e-commerce company. I've also worked with tech unicorns such as Wayfair and a few smaller startups here in Canada. And just really exciting to be here to share some of my learnings through the journey with you.
Great. So welcome again, and you can start on.
Yeah, okay, happy to do that. So I'm just gonna quickly flip through. So essentially we're going to talk about the ROI with UX today. I guess as one-on-one, we have to talk about what is ROI, right? So essentially ROI is return on investment. It's usually a performance measure, and how you actually calculate it, it's your current value of investment minus current cost of investment, then divide the cost of investment. So essentially you're calculating the return, like on the investment you made. So that's pure ROI. Then what is ROI with UX? So essentially it's not a topic just for head of designs or managers. We all encountering it throughout our design careers at sometimes. So we want to do a lot of times as a designer, we want to say, okay, with this project, can we do usability testing, or can we try to take a different approach? And when you grow senior in your career, you want to establish a different initiative. Sometimes you want to say, can we do this or can we do that? And if you're on the management track, sometimes you will be like, okay, I need to hire a new designer, a new researcher, a new strategist. So when we're talking about those things we want to propose, a lot of times we can't really make the decision solely. Majority of the designers or managers, everybody basically, we work on cross-functional teams, which means we need to convince others. We really need to demonstrate why we want to do this and what are the potential outcomes before we can really go ahead and do the stuff we want to do. So essentially, we as a design team, we are a function of business. I know a lot of times when we talk about, okay, we represent users, business objectives. But in a nutshell, we are part of the business. And first thing, most of the businesses are for profit. Essentially, a lot of times when you look at the organizational structure of design, design is part of business or part of product. So in some companies, design is actually under the product organization. And in other companies, if you look at the top of pyramid of design, which is head of design, they report into either product leaders, or sometimes if you do have like a chief design officer, they do eventually report into the CEO of the company, which is sort of, we are part of the business. And as part of the business, we also have to considering for profit, obviously. And ultimately, regardless of the product design or engineering, which discipline you are on, we are trying to understand the business from the different perspective. And when we say like a business goals versus user goals, that's a lot of times true, but not true at the same time. Because business goal is to address user goals. We all talk about, okay, if the design-led company, it will like have a higher profit, it will have like a 400% of maturity, etc. All those glamorous data. But essentially, this is all just talking about business goal is to address user goals. If we don't address user goals, then it's not a successful business. So we are part of the business, which means we have to consider the profit. We have to consider the return. And this is a definition I aligned with the most. When we talk about design as a function of business, usually we say we partner with the product team in the product delivery, discovery process to solve the right problem and solve the problem right. So this is a double diamond we all pretty familiar with. Essentially, this describing the product discovery process. And then after that, essentially, we're going into the product delivery, which usually our engineering or technology partners owns. And here we partner with the product team. We help to solve the right problem and solve the problem right. So this also describes where we're sitting in the organization or in the process. Okay, so back to where we started, when we need to make a case. Essentially, when we need to make the case, first of all, it's usually before the fact. Because when we say we want to convince people to do the things we want to do, usually it's in the proposal stage. We need to convince our partners, stakeholders, this is a good idea. Why we need more designers, why we need more support, why we need the resource, when we want to take a different approach. And the second thing is the projected ROI, return on investment, is based on reasonable assumptions. Because at the proposal stage, obviously, we don't really have concrete data to say if we do this, this is some profit we're going to get. A lot of times it's based on reasonable assumptions. And when we make a proposal, we usually have to say, okay, what it is, what we want to do, why we should do it, how do we plan to achieve it? And the last thing, last but not least, we need to talk about the resource we need. And essentially this whole assumption process, reasonable assumption process, it's to prove it will worth it at the end of the day. So talked about what is ROI. Now we have to talk about how do we actually unpack to make this reasonable assumption. Essentially to increase the return, it's not rocket science. There's really just two ways of doing it. The first one is increasing the revenue. And when we talk about in the business concept, we want to increase revenue, there's usually two ways. First of all, we have more customers. And second of all, we have more average customer value or average order value, which means each of the customers will spend slightly more. And that's on the revenue generating side. And on the other side, it's decreasing the cost. So essentially, we're looking to less fixed cost or less variable costs. So what's the difference between fixed cost and variable cost? Fixed costs are basically our business expenses that are not dependent on the level of goods or services produced by the business. So essentially, if we're running a facility, we have rent, we have equipment already there, those are fixed costs. It does not grow based on like more services or goods you're producing. And then we have less variable costs, basically the material and labor, especially labor. which means the cost that change as a quantity of the goods or services that the business produce. And a lot of times when we're talking about decreasing costs, most of the times, majority of times, we're talking about less variable costs. So to keep going, let's talk a little bit about the proposals we're potentially going to make. So usually in the design context, there are 3 types of proposals we usually want to make throughout the process. So we want to either make usability improvements, or we want to increase or improve the consistency, or we want to improve the desirability of the product. Those are sort of a high-level categories, stuff we want to make. And let's unpack a little bit what are those different proposals and what are the potential return we can increase in that context. So starting with usability, this is essentially, in fact, most of the approach we want to do or resource we want to ask is dedicated to improve the usability of the product. To give you an example, let's say we want to redesign the hero of a page or a website. And since we're talking about redesign, obviously the current performance probably not on par with what we hoped for. So, and how did we know it's not on par with what we wanted? Essentially, we do have some preliminary data to say, okay, what is the current click-through rate or current conversion that is not on par with what we have right now. So essentially, we're able to find a gap between currently how it performs and the industry standards, or potentially internal standards, like if it's a campaign page, what are other campaign pages that perform, what are the click-through rates on those pages. And how we could potentially calculate is use a gap between the current, let's say, conversion rate and the industry standard conversion rate to multiply the average traffic of this page. So we know how much gaps we have on the traffic wise. Then we use the traffic volume to multiply the average cart value or average order value. Essentially means if those customers, they would successfully convert and they're making average order, how much basically revenue we could gain from this gap. Essentially, you will potentially get a number, which is a revenue design could potentially increase. And the same thing, if we're not talking about e-commerce website, if we're talking about something else, you don't really have a conversion point, but you do have click-through rate. So essentially, if you compare the current click-through rate to industry standard or other better performing pages, multiply the average traffic, essentially you will be able to get a number, which is how much traffic you can potentially increase, click-through rate you can increase on this page. So that's one side of the things when we talk about the potential revenue increase. And then we'll also sometimes look at the cost, variable cost savings that associate with this very same example. So a lot of times, especially in B2B, intentions are not go through with a digital channel. It will result in a call center. For example, if we're talking about this hero banner, if it's a promotion, we want people to actually go through to execute on the promotion. And if people are not able to go through, they will instead call the call center to execute on it. And usually our call center employees will take time to resolve those issues, to answer the question, to help facilitate this promote things to happen. So we will have an average time, basically each ticket or each of the call. Usually how long does it take? Usually it's ranging from like 15 minutes, at least it will cost 15 minutes to 30 minutes. And then you remember the previous traffic. Those are the people cannot convert on the website through the digital channel. They will end up in call center. And so you have the volume, you multiply it with the time each of the person will take from the call center employees. Then you multiply with the call center employees' potential salary. then essentially you will getting also a number, which is a dollar number. That is a potential variable cost you can save by getting people to transaction on digital channel, do self-serve. You are saving the cost from the call center. So that's the example when we talk about usability improvements. And to keep going, we have the second one, which is consistency. I think for consistency, a lot of times we're talking about design system. Why do we need design system? Why do we need to do this? All those good things. So first thing I want to highlight is a design system. Essentially, it's a go slow to go faster approach. At the very beginning, it won't be as faster as if we just address the surface issue, because essentially we have to do audit, we have to redesign the components, we have to look at different use cases. There are a lot of resource and time going into it. So the right expectation to set up, it's a go slow to go faster. Down the road will be faster, but for the first a few things we want to address, it's absolutely will be slower. But how do we prove it's all gonna worth it? So we talk about like a lot of designers or design leaders take screenshots of all the different styles to say, okay, it's not consistent, let's make it consistent. That's just a surface level issue. Essentially, a lot of times different styles are causing different like maintenance issue. So when we have 20 different styles, which means your engineering team or your site ops team eventually had to maintain 20 different styles. And when we make changes to one consistent styles, the maintenance cost is a lot of smaller. So essentially how we actually make the math here is in the number of styles to multiply the time needed to make one change, then multiply the change frequency, which means are we changing button copy, I don't know, 52 times a year, 26 times a year, 4 times a year, depends on season, etc. Then multiply the hourly cost of the employee. So essentially, you will get a number, how much it's going to cost when we change multiple 20 different styles, and how much are the potential saving if we do make it consistent. And if we just need to maintain one style, how much cost savings are there? So essentially, this is the variable cost saving. And another aspect is an usually established design system or being consistent is one of the ways to improve usability. And it's basically just go back to the previous slide we talked about. We can then calculate in the increasing in the revenue and the potential cost when we do improve the usability. So that's the second one. And keep going a little bit. Then we have desirability. So example we want to talk about here is usually concept testing. When we want to say, okay, we want to run a test to see if this actually works for our user before we actually implement very high costing development and design to it. So usually there are a few talk points associated with the desirability. We know in the development context, we do a lot of proof of concept, POC. We want to make sure it works before we actually get all the development teams to work on this idea. It's the same thing. Sometimes we can sort of narrate our concept testing as a design POC. Essentially, we want to make sure we're only invest on things going to bring us big wins. We don't really want to invest on things. What if it's not work? And essentially, it's also going to avoid the ripple effect, because we probably all heard a lot of examples. Sometimes our cross-functional partners will be like, yeah, you don't really need to do the research. We'll just iterate it. We'll launch it. We'll test with our real user. Then they will tell us what is good or what is bad. So essentially, we're talking about saving the opportunity cost here, because essentially, when we actually invest development into the potential idea without knowing if it's a good idea or not, we are there will be opportunity cost, because not only is the idea could potentially not working out, and the time and effort you spend on this potentially failed idea could be invested on other potentially successful idea. Essentially, your opportunity cost, it's not only you have to, or the result you're not getting, but also the potentially good opportunities you're wasting there. And another thing is just a ripple effect. When you commit some sort of build, usually when you're trying to go back, not all the options are available because then we've made decisions throughout the process. It's just hard to change at the end or at the stage. So when we're trying to address the desirability, those are the potential angles we can go with. And last but not least, things to consider. Majority of my career I've been working as an in-house designer, which means building trust with our digital partners or stakeholders is a topic that is super important. And we've talked about a lot of ways to propose to establish initiative, but essentially, when we actually build the trust with the partner and the stakeholders, when they do understand what design does, you don't really have to continue to repeat those ways of proposing or ways of working, because then when we establish the basic trust, sometimes things are just a lot easier. And that means the goal here, usually it's not trying to educate us to be the business analyst, to really figure out for different ways of working or for different ideas we want to propose, how to really carve out the numbers, how to speak the language. That probably not or shouldn't be the end goal. The end goal should be shift the mindset, really build empathy or help our stakeholders to build empathy towards the design team and design process. And when we do shift the mindset, they do understand what we do or what design does. A lot of times you don't have to really repeat those number games. And one last thing I want to call out is to consider the stage of business and life cycle of the product. Because same thing, when I talk about all those tricks you could potentially use or techniques you could use, a lot of times we talk about an established business, which we do have an annual budget on those different things. You can propose to get budget to make things happen. But a lot of times, or sometimes, we're talking about very small business, like a startup, and you're probably the first designer they've ever hired. And it's extremely hard to propose those ideas, not because your stakeholders doesn't understand the value of design. It's probably because the business have other priorities. For example, to maintain a positive cash flow, or to get your first project out of the door, or get your first clients in the door. So when you have that types of urgency, a lot of times it's not about value of design, or it's not about build empathy. It's really about for designer to understand what is a business goal here and trying to orient yourself around what could potentially be happen and find out the middle ground, basically creative solutions to really get insights you potentially want, but sometimes not follow a normative process. And then the second thing we want to call is the life cycle of the product. Usually there are two types of project. First one is building from 0 to 1, which is you're creating things from scratch or you're redesigning something from scratch. And another one is from 1 to 100, which is a more iterative process. And your proposal is a lot harder to work when things are between 0 to 1, because think about same thing. The project could be trying to go out of the door, to go to the market, to be the first to establish on the market. And when people are trying to just get something to work, it's a lot harder to get them to go a step higher, think holistically, because they really just want to go out to the market first. They don't want to wait until the competitor conquer the market. So it's a lot harder, 0 to 1. But essentially, when we're going into the stage of the product that is 1 to 100, when we're going through the iterative, the customer value are more and more important, because essentially we want to have the larger market share on the market and how we distinguish ourselves with other competitor products. Usually customer experience is one of the most things we're going to offer. So essentially at that stage, it's a lot easier to propose what UX wants to do, what design wants to do. One last thing, user experience creates customer value. So as we just talked about, the goal essentially is to build the empathy to ask our stakeholders or help our stakeholders to really understand what we do here. A lot of times we don't really need the numbers. We want to help them to understand what is UX design, which is a process design team used to translate business requirements into meaningful and relevant experience to users. And UX as customer experience in the digital context, we work alongside of business to identify user needs and help bring the gap between business requirements and user goals. So we want to establish this empathy towards design, which is only good product that delivers value to customers can fulfill the business goals, essentially eventually to power the financial results our business are looking for. And on the right side is this one diagram we're all familiar with. A good product, essentially, it's a sweet spot, is the one when business technology and user experience aligns. And the idea of all great mindset coming together is not linear, and it's not about who signs off after whom. It's also not about who has the rightful responsibility to make decisions. It's really agile, and it should be interlocked at each stage of the product development. And from design perspective, we are good facilitators. We're good facilitators if we are able to shift the mindset of the internal team to really build empathy. Not only we build empathy towards other teams, but also help other teams to build empathy towards the design team. We should have less and less conversation in terms of the value of design, why we should do this or that. And here it is. This is last one. So thank you, everyone. And I'll hand it back to Tushar.
Great. I think you already articulate each and every point, and that was really wonderful. We have a good couple of questions, so I will take those questions. I have also a few questions for you. So,
of course.
Okay, right? Okay. So now, almost Lennie has covered very detailed, how we can use this ROI and how UX team can work. So see, the problem with return on investment, basically, suppose nowadays we have a different type of UX processes each company follow, depending on small startup or big companies. Like some people follow user-centered design or design thinking, agile UX, lot of process-oriented people, or we like to work process-oriented. Okay. So in that scenario, as a manager or as a UX lead or team lead, how we can manage this everything, because one side we have a stakeholder who they will expect obviously profit from their work. They are putting trust on us that we are a provider, so we are a solution providers. So how is any, or you can suggest which is the best process, or is there some golden rule or something that we can have, like return on investment while applying correct UX process?
Yeah, totally. That's such a great question. I think based on my experience, and same thing I have to highlight because I've always been an in-house like designer or design manager, which means my stakeholders are usually also part of the internal team. And in that sense, when we're trying to improve internal process, a lot of times it's about understand what UX team does. It's like we mentioned a little bit at the beginning, we're partnering with a product team, but another angle of it, it's a UX team, essentially, it's a pretty unique team. A lot of times we are not only a delivery team, we're also not a strategic team trying to form strategy. A lot of times we handle both. We have to prove we have excellence and efficiency on the design delivery. And on the other hand, we're also sort of leading the customer strategy, customer first approach, trying to establish all the principles and good things for the organization. And when we talk with stakeholders, I think first of all, we need to emphasize our empathy, build empathy towards the internal user. What is their role? What is their goal? When we talk about the stakeholders we're working with at the delivery layer, obviously their goal is to get things out the door as soon as possible. And if that is the case, then two sides of things. First of all, figure out the constraints, because sometimes our stakeholders, they have a business value to achieve, or they have a specific KPI or OKR they have to achieve. Or sometimes they are our first degree stakeholders. They also have their stakeholders. They have to fulfill their commitment. So the first side of things, it's really to figure out what is the constraints. Because let's say if the expectation, or at the end of the day, if it's a bug we have to fix, it needs to be launched next day. Otherwise, there's legal consequences. This would not be a good time to say, okay, let's establish a great UX process and start with research. We gotta do what we gotta do. That's part of the UX delivery. Really understand the situation there and really to execute on it. Then on the other hand, if we do find out there are not that much constraints, or there is a wiggle room for us to propose or to do different things, trying to get in there early. Because as mentioned, the whole process, not only the UX process, is from abstract to concrete. Like at the very beginning, it's just a concept, or it's very simple, it's a KPI. We need to improve conversions 3%. At that stage, you can unpack it in different ways. We all understand those business goals in different mindset. Design could unpack it in the way of improve customer experience, or engineering can improve it or unpack it in a different way, such as let's say re-platform or getting a different technology to support it. Getting there early to be part of the conversation to unpack the result we want to achieve will help you to will help you to get the voice of customer or voice of design there, and essentially to work alongside with your stakeholders to really make sure you are at each of the stage. If you are getting in at the very late in the stage, which is a solution, it's already pretty much formed, very concrete, there's less wiggle room, because essentially when we start to propose things, it's going to become, okay, all those time we already spent without design to define from abstract to concrete will be a waste of time. Sometimes not everybody will open to do that, depending on the situation, but it's also a good lesson for business stakeholders. If next time you could involve us early, that will be a different situation, or will help you to form a better decision, etc. If that makes sense.
I think yes, a lot of stakeholders they have to play a big role here. So let's take some audience question. I have one more question. Okay. So how do you find the industry standards of these metrics? So
yeah, of course. So different teams have different practice. I would suggest if you want free resource, just search on Google. There are a lot of free resource there, and specifically to UX metrics, look at our favorite Nelson Norman. They have a lot of articles regarding like calculating ROI and UX metrics. Those are good guidelines. And I know some organizations, they do subscribe to like industry reports. I think at Staples, like we do subscribe to Baymart, which is talking about e-commerce websites and industry standards. So utilize those paid or non-paid resources.
oh. So there are two similar line questions here. That any practical tips how to use this in real life, or how to apply all these techniques in entry-level UX designers?
Yeah, sure, of course. So I think for the entry level, or if you just get into the industry, a lot of times you won't be facing the question or problem like, hey, I want to hire a new designer, what should I do? Majority of times it's you've been asked to do a design and you were like, oh, I can't really do it. I really need to do some research. And the stakeholder will be like, no, we don't have time, or we haven't have budget planned for it, just do the design. So essentially those probably majority of the problems we're facing. I think at that level, there are really two things. First of all, we've talked about figure out what is the stage of the company, what is stage of the project, how much constraints, how much wiggle room you do have there in the specific ask. And if you do have the flexibility in terms of timeline resource, trying to demonstrate and bring your stakeholders along the journey. Like a lot of times we talk about we want to bring the field to your stakeholder, which means you can ask them to take notes when you're conducting research, or you can record the research and play the video, play the clips for them. Essentially bring them along in the journey to really help them to build empathy towards the UX design. And on the other side, usually in a lot of companies, analytics team are at similar space of UX. Like a lot of times they're being not forget, but also late to the table. Do build alliance with your analytics partners, get data from them, and work with them to build a case study together, get suggestions from them. So go pitch to the business stakeholders together.
We have one interesting question. Nowadays, people are switch here, like from non-design to design, or maybe from core design to UX design. So as a beginning of career, and then maybe how we can use this process, so where the people who are starting their career, where they can sit, because ROI business, sometimes I don't think stakeholder or even managers will involve junior people in this entire thing. But what is their role here? How they can process this? Right?
Yeah, let me try to rephrase the question. So when we talk about switch the career from the core, is that the question? Can you rephrase the question for me? Yeah, thank you.
So when switching our career from core design to core UX field, how we can set a goal for all these processes, right? So basically how we can fit, right?
Right, exactly. I think, are we talking about setting goals for ourselves or setting goals for the overall organization? I think those are different. If we're talking about setting goals for the organization, trying to improve the maturity level of the organization, based on my experience, we won't be able to get to the very end. Or not based on experience. It's like everyone knows we can't really get to the last step, basically directly jump there. You sort of have to gradually build the trust and gradually build the empathy throughout the whole process. And essentially, usually there are 3 steps. That's how I took. The first step, it's to really help the team themselves to understand what they do. Because then the first thing is that everyone on the design team have to understand what does it mean to be a UX designer or product designer, how ourselves fit into the overall current process. Are we focused on delivery? Are we just getting requirements to produce the design artifacts? Or we are representing the customers on the table. We're expected by business to provide specialized design perspective. We have to be clear first, what do we do? And then we communicate, this is what we do. And then the second thing is really the operation efficiency and excellence. Because like I mentioned, design team a lot of times, or why business start to invest on design, it's not because they want a team to come here to lead strategy. Usually when new teams created, because we want to specialize the delivery roles. So when we have UX designers here, we really need to build the process which emphasize on how can we deliver design artifacts more efficient, like be iterative, align with technology, help unpack questions efficiently, etc. There are different ways for us or different touch points in the process for us to demonstrate how can we accelerate the process, or how can we avoid the ripple effect? How can we facilitate the right conversation to happen, right decisions to happen? So that's the second thing usually I will build towards. And then the third thing, the ultimate goal, we know as designers, we want to also be part of the strategy conversation because we represent the customer experience, we represent the value of customer, but essentially you have to build upon the foundation, build upon the design, delivery excellence. Then we're talking about how to transform the organization, which is how can we build experience principles, how do we have master journeys and personas. Those things sort of like when we do through the excellence of delivery we build the trust with our stakeholders. The third step, which are all those great strategy layer, will eventually come, and it will be easier for you to pitch those ideas.
I think it is more about each company, they have protocols and process. So that needs to be followed by whenever you join any team, I think you need to understand what is your business and the thing that you correctly said. Let's take some more questions. Okay. Is any benchmarking important and how it works?
Is benchmarking important and how it works? Yes and no. I would say when we talk to, I think benchmarking is important in a way. When you talk to stakeholders, because then I think a lot of times we talk about, we align or we orient ourselves around the industry benchmarking or industry standard. That's sort of the business language and how they usually craft their KPIs. So in that sense, orient ourselves, align with benchmarking is definitely important. Sometimes it's also not important because sometimes like designers, we are specialized where we understand the qualitative insights better. So sometimes we talk about improvements or we talk about maturity. It's not a concrete or quantitative benchmarking, but sometimes it works too.
Right. One more question is that, do you use service design approach?
Yeah, totally. So design thinking, I think what we've talked about today, it's all about design thinking. It's about like the double diamond we're trying to emphasize, we're trying to define, we're trying to unpack the problem, prototype testing, iterative process. So yes, and I think as mentioned in the last second slide, the whole design thinking process, it's not a linear process. We're trying to shift the mindset of the organization. We want to make sure we see things in layers and we interlock at each layer rather than, okay, technology gonna make design decision before design gonna make decision before product, etc. Like that's not the collaboration model we're looking for. The great minds coming together is to create like 1 + 1 more than 2, rather than trying to figure out who holds the most responsibility and accountability.
Great. I think Sunday time, so I don't want to stretch it a bit. But before we conclude, I think definitely audience have got insight what they are looking for. But see, I have one last question here. So
yeah.
Okay. See, like whenever we work with the UX teams and whenever we go for decide which is the process and we are which is process we are following. So as a design team or as a part of a design team, what are my responsibilities here? Where should I where should I think whether this is my job or is there business analysts they will do and they will ask me to do something and then I will take it. In short, how you think UX designer should be proactive in this process? Like,
totally. Of course, that's such a great question. And I think throughout my career, there are a lot of bad use cases of this one. I've been to, or I was on different type of project. There are nothing, when we kick off the project, there was nothing but a RACI. Essentially just outlining who is doing what, who is accountable for what. And there's really no strategy or concrete next step. So that's totally a bad example. But then there's also on the other extreme, which is everybody's too friendly. No one's making decisions. So we all try to like, hey, this is my part. What do you think? And no one is really putting together. So I think as a designer, usually in my personal view, I usually want to build the friendly design team, which is we do help everybody and we hear what you're trying to achieve and we will help you to achieve what you are trying to achieve. That's sort of usually what we do. And I think in that process, the first thing needs to be clear is we're not a pure delivery team. It's not about, oh, give me all the input. Then I'll go back to a small room, I'll craft something, then get back to you. That's not what we do. We definitely adopt and trying to influence in a collaborative process. And the second thing is we're also trying to move the process forward. That's sort of like as mentioned, we're part of the business. The goal of the project is not to fight to figure out who is right. The goal of the project is to moving the process forward. Right. So when there's conflict or when there's no one making decisions, like I would hope my designers to put their hands up to help facilitate the decision making. It's not necessarily means design will step up saying, hey, this is a user goals, let's do that. It's more like we can have a brainstorming session. We can have a working session, journey mapping marketing session, all kinds of sessions we're good at facilitating to help the process to move forward. So as part of the business, this is also our goal because we also want the project to success. We don't want to stuck at each of the points, right? Right. So that's usually how I approach this.
Great. I think we covered almost business processes, team. I think we touched base. Almost we tried to cover. Okay. So we have one question.
Yeah.
Most of the companies, we don't have a single dedicated UX designer. We have a single person who is doing most everything, whether it's UI, UX, research, everything, how they should have to work in this environment. I think, Jamil, you are tackling day-to-day's problem. Everyone, I think every team member has this problem. Yes, you want to take this?
Yeah, totally. I think this is something we said, picks right battle. Essentially, you have different battlefield. You can fight for research. You can improve the delivery efficiency. You can help track KPIs and do work with some alliance, some stakeholders on the table, like the analytics team or like the product team or the engineers team to find alliance on the table and pick the right battle to figure out where you can sort of make the most impact through this whole journey. And in my experience, if it's a one-person team, usually it's at the delivery efficiency, trying to align yourself with a technology team to do the iterative process.
Right, great. I think thanks everyone for today's UXTalk group discussions. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks Lennie for your stick out Sunday time for design thing community. Again, do follow us on ADPList and LinkedIn and other platforms. Lennie is a mentor on ADPList, so you can connect with her. You can follow her on LinkedIn also. So let's wait for new talk. We are coming with very interesting topics and speaker. As I said earlier, if you have any suggestions on which topic we should take, please do suggest so that we can have good interactions and great speakers on our platform. Again, once again, thanks. Where it is Sunday morning, have a great Sunday. Sunday evening, best of luck for Monday. Okay.
Yeah.
So thanks again. We'll back with new topics definitely. Thanks, Lennie. Once again. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.